Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. This is Josh Wander from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, the holy city which God's name is on and his eyes are always watching. I'm here with my co-host, Rabbi Moshe Lichtman from the city of Beit Shemesh.
Hello, hello. Welcome to our show, and we hope you enjoy this week's episode.
Israel Unplugged, of course, is where you get the unadulterated facts of where we're holding in the redemptive process, focusing primarily on the ingathering of the exiles. This is a live show, and we encourage our listeners to call in wherever they may be. If they happen to be outside of Israel and they are not lucky enough to be here, they can call a North American number. It's 301-768-4841. Or if they are here in Eretz Yisrael, they're also encouraged to call in and comment and question. That number would be 02-650-0151, 02-650-0151. We would love to hear what you have to say about any subject relating to Aliyah and Eretz Yisrael. And of course, the parashiot, the Torah portions that we are going through now, are very related to our connection, the Jewish people's connection to the land of Israel, and we were going to be speaking about that as well. I want to encourage everybody to go to our websites. Rabbi Lichtman website is at toratzion.com, and there you will find his books and his lectures and all sorts of interesting materials. And I also encourage everyone to go to our website, which is bringthemhome.org.il, also at itstimetolive.com, and to look over there at the podcasts and at the video series and at the blogs and all the interesting materials that we have gathered for your leisure. I want to also say that we're actually, you know what, we're going to wait until the show starts, and I'm going to actually speak a little bit about some of that, because there's something very interesting going on, as there always is here in the land of Israel. So stay with us, and you don't want to miss this show, so we'll be right back.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. This is Josh Wander, and as I mentioned before in the beginning of the show, that we have some exciting things for you. One of the things I mentioned was that we have a website, and we also have a video series which is on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is at Israel Torah, ISRAELTORAH, Israel Torah. I encourage everybody to go there, to subscribe, to click on the notifications. We always have interesting videos, both live seminars as well as recorded videos about the topic of Eretz Yisrael. And one of those videos was a great interview that we did with Rabbi Yitzchak Breidowitz. Rabbi Breidowitz was a prominent rabbi in Baltimore. But not only was he a rabbi, but he was also a law professor in the law school in Baltimore, I believe it was in the University of Maryland, and he had an excellent show with us, where he was explaining the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael today, the importance of Jews coming home, And there were a number of comments on this video, which I wanted to discuss a little bit, because there was somebody that was clearly upset and offended by our words. I think specifically my words, maybe, as you'll see from the comments. And he started out. I'll just read off the back and forth, a little of the back and forth that went on. And I'd love to hear Rabbi Lichtman's comments if he has any. So the person is writing to us. I'm sure this is not his name, but he goes by Owl Bay, and he says, "This guy," I assume he's referring to me, "never stops with his Zionism. Who is obtuse? All the Gedolim, all the great rabbis, he means, who never advocated going to Israel? Are they obtuse? What a chutzpah." So in a friendly manner, I wrote back to him, and I said, which Gedolim never advocated fulfilling one of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, and the one compared to all the rest, nonetheless, the one which a third can only be done in? If such Gedolim existed, I put Gedolim in quotes, maybe they were related to the great leaders of the 10 tribes that spied the land and chose to turn their backs to Hashem by bringing back a negative report, as we mentioned in the last week's Torah portion. He responds to this. Start with this one. And he quotes, "It is ridiculous to tell a young man who does a good job or has prepared or trained himself to do a good job here in the U.S. that he must instead go to Eretz Yisrael. Good job means to spread Torah or to lead an exemplary life which serves as an example to others through personal contact. There are many ways to convert contact." Maybe he meant conduct.
He meant conduct.
There are many ways to convert and educate Jews. I am not giving up on American Jews. If I feel that in my town or in my village I will accomplish a lot, and when I come to Eretz Yisrael, so I or more influence will be reduced to zero, my place is here, not there. Some who went to Eretz Yisrael achieved the same objectives they would have in the diaspora, but only some. I know of many who fail. They don't admit it. It's nice on their part not to admit it. And he quotes this from Rabbi, I don't know if this whole thing was a quote or just the first part. I'm guessing it was the first part, but I'm not sure. From Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, the Rav, Thinking Aloud, page 242 and 3. My response to that was Rav Soloveitchik never suggested that Jews shouldn't fulfill the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. And indeed, thousands of his students, including his famed son-in-law, Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal, chose to do exactly that. I'd only add that the Rav said that these words over a half a century ago, and a lot has happened since then. Context is important. His response.
What about before you get to that? What about Rav Soloveitchik's famous Kol Dodido fake, where he talks about the 6 knocks, how the state of Israel is the fulfillment of, is God is divinely inspired, or it's God's way of bringing the Jewish people back to Him, etc., etc. I mean, that's called picking and choosing.
Everything he wrote.
Exactly. I will say that Rav Soloveitchik had a very wishy-washy, let's put it that way, relationship or opinion on the state of Israel. He was back and forth. He definitely was. He I think eventually became disenfranchised with it. He thought it was going to be something else, and it didn't turn out to be exactly what he wanted. But certainly in theory, he felt that it was a good thing. And he was a complicated person, but he's not the only gadol
we can only speculate.
Yeah,
but you can assume that he had an internal struggle because he came from a family. His grandfather was a person that was one of the leaders of the Torah generation that was anti-Zionist, and he mentions in his Chamesh Torah why he broke off from his family tradition in order to join Mizrahi, and clearly that was a struggle that he was having until the end of his days. Yeah.
All right. So how did you answer?
So I responded. I said, Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying, this is his response. Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying that you have to consider your whole life. You don't trash it to live in Eretz Yisrael. It's not that kind of mitzvah. It is in sense optional, meaning you don't destroy your other mitzvahs for it. The Gemara says you can leave Eretz Yisrael for Torah, Parnasa, and Shidduchim. Implied in that is that you can leave for your sanity. For many people, moving here is unproductive and even destructive. It is a crazy place. It's an intense place. There is no derech eretz. It's very hard for Anglos to earn a living here.
This is actually the sin of the spies.
Like wait. Rabbi Lichtman, wait into my response because I mentioned it. Breidewitz's salary comes from American donors. He's not living in Eretz Yisrael. He lives in America, really. He thinks he's a chalutz. He lives on American money, and he tells you to move here and become an Israeli. He and you have made a religion out of living in Israel. It's a religion unto itself. Instead of judging everyone who doesn't come here, maybe you should consider there's good reason for it. It's interesting. He goes back between saying here and there, which I'm not sure if he's in Israel or not, this person. So I responded by saying, I'm debating whether to remove your comment that is full of dibat ha'aretz, but perhaps it would be beneficial for some to hear the response. Indeed, the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael is different and is equated to all the other mitzvot in the Torah. As Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman Hashem Yikom Damo wrote in his Kovetz Ma'amarim, and he was known as an anti-Zionist, Eretz Yisrael occupies a major place in the Torah. 3/6 orders of the Mishnah are connected exclusively to Eretz Yisrael. Those of Zeroim, Kodshim, and Taharos. A large portion of the remaining 3 also relate to Eretz Yisrael. In Moed, there are the entire tractates dedicated to the mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael, Yoma, Shkolim, Chagiga, the last half of Psachim, last chapters of Sukkah, and much of Tanya. By the way, I'm quoting from your translation. In Nashim, Nazir, and Sota, in Nezikim, Sanhedrin, Makos, Horus, about 2/3 of the Talmud depends on Eretz Yisrael. The same proportion can be found in the Chumash. It is therefore evident that Eretz Yisrael is vital to the Jewish people, besides which dwelling in the land is a mitzvah in its own right. What we are stressing, and I end the quote there, what we are stressing is the fact that many Jews who live abroad are completely oblivious to the centrality of Eretz Yisrael, and would they be aware of it and treat it at least as the same level as other major mitzvot, many would choose to live here. You are correct that there are exceptions to the rule, but they are exceptions, and the heterim that the Rambam mentions for not living here are only temporary and not a permanent excuse not to live in the land.
Right. I was going to say that. The Rambam writes explicitly, V'dato lachzor. It has to be that his intention is to return. He can leave temporarily to do those 3 things. Yes.
So his response to that, and I find this humorous because we're talking about it on the radio right now, is he says, of course you are debating removing my comment. What Zionist wants an open discussion? It always comes down to censorship with cults. Of course, I did not remove his comment, and I responded to it, and we're speaking about it on the radio, so clearly we're not censoring it, and we are more than happy to address it. I finished off saying back to him, considering the fact that I didn't delete your comment, even though I consider it to be blatant dibat ha'aretz and nothing to do with political Zionism. Likewise, considering that I responded clearly and directly to your misguided comments, I find it hard to believe that you could possibly accuse me of censorship. Either way, I see you have an agenda to discredit the truth, and I'll leave it up to the readers to decide who is being disingenuous. So that was the comment. This is not unusual, by the way, to have these people that come up and I believe they do have an agenda. You could argue that we also have an agenda, but I believe that the agenda that we have is not, as he claims, a new religion, but actually bringing back and bringing to the forefront what has always been recognized by our great sages.
A specific, putting emphasis on a specific mitzvah. I always say that. People again accuse me and others of doing the same thing, of making this into what's called an avodah zara, an idolatry. Right, the Satmar Rebbe writes a lot about that. According to that, I would say that most of those people would consider the Chafetz Chaim to be an idolater, because he put a lot of emphasis on the mitzvah of Lashon Hara, so he must be an idolater. He's putting too much emphasis on one mitzvah. Like, why is he always talking about it? Why did he write so many books about it? Why doesn't he just talk equally about every one of the 613 mitzvot? That's ridiculous. The Chafetz Chaim spoke so much about it because he felt that people were lax in that mitzvah, and therefore they needed to hear the truth. So we're saying the same thing. None of us would ever in a million years say that you should abrogate any single mitzvah in the Torah. We're saying you should keep all the 613 mitzvot, but including the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, we are going to be right back. Stay with us.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Shalom, I'm Leah Aharoni. Join me on my show, News from the Torah. Each Sunday, we'll use the weekly Torah portion as a prism for understanding the news today. Listen to News from the Torah to gain clarity about the times we're living in and to understand your own spiritual path in the process. News from the Torah every Sunday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. This is Rabbi Moshe Lichtman. We're here with Josh Wander, and we were just discussing a back and forth that Josh had on his website with a clearly anti-Zionistic religious Jew. And to counter that, I wanted to read a recent email correspondence that I had with somebody. It was so beautiful, and it was so encouraging to me. I want to share it with you. I won't say his name because I don't know if he'll want his name to be publicized, but I got the following email. He starts off like this. First of all, thank you so much for translating Ema Banim Smecha. We've discussed that book on this show before. I am looking forward to buying your other Sfarim once we make Aliyah. And then he says, background. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Lakewood, New Jersey, going to mainstream yeshivas and going to mainstream base medrash. During this time, I learned very little about Eretz Yisrael other than it's a nice place to visit. The Israeli government hates Jews. It's very controversial to live there. There's pretty much no mitzvah to live there. And even if there is one, it's more important to live in America. It might even be an Aveira, meaning a transgression, to move there to Israel before Mashiach comes, because it's really not our land until Mashiach comes. My wife had a similar experience in her Beis Yaakov. Needless to say, only when I started to look into the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of dwelling in Eretz Yisrael, I realized the importance of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's why, God willing, my family and I will be moving to Eretz Yisrael this August. When some of my friends heard about what I was doing, they started to learn about it too, and investigate too, and also made the decision to move to Eretz Yisrael. He just moved, he's talking about one of his friends, he just moved this past Hanukkah with his family, sold his house, closed his business, and now lives in Ramat Beit Shemesh.
Amazing.
And then, isn't it amazing? Like, there are, thank God, people out there who really want to know the truth. And, in an unbiased way, look into the sources and read books on both sides. That's the biggest problem. The extreme elements on the other side are not willing to even give any weight to any other book that's written in positive for the state of Israel and for the mitzvah of living in Israel. They belittle them. They say that it's all they're not gedolim like our gedolim are, etc., etc. And then he wrote as follows. Here's my question. I am in the process of making a pamphlet book or a book with Hashem, with God's help, on hopefully most sources from the Tanakh, from the Bible, all the way to Achronim about Kedushat Eretz Yisrael, about the holiness of the land of Israel, and Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. I also would like to transcribe different rabbis' speeches about Eretz Yisrael, and he wanted to know whether I can help him with some of these speeches and some of these sources, etc., etc. And my response to him was quite humorous. I said, "Well, I have some good news and some bad news for you. The bad news is, or no, I think I start with the good news. I said the good news is that I already wrote the book. So the bad news is you're not going to be able to write it." And he was thrilled. He was so happy that, I already had put out a book exactly what he was talking about. And we've been in touch, and he's thinking of ways of how to push the book in the communities that he's from, in Lakewood and other such places. And so thank God there's people on both sides, but I really think that it should be a decision that is a fair decision, which means let people read the Satmar Rebbe's works, but let them also read Ema Barim Smecha, and let them see which one talks to them more, which one they feel is more the truth, and not belittle, like this guy that wrote to you. He belittled it as if no Gedolim say. He said the way he said it is so sad. Like all of the Gedolim, were against it. All of the Gedolim were against it. Is he aware of the sefer called Shivat Zion? I think it's called Shivat Zion, which was a certain Rabbi Slutsky who lived. We're talking about the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. I don't remember exactly. Where this is when this whole debate started, and he decided to write letters to the great rabbis of his generation and ask them what they think about this up and coming movement to return to Eretz Yisrael, the Chovevei Tzion movement, etc. And the book is a collection of all the letters that he got from accepted, worldwide, universally accepted Gedolim in favor of coming back to Eretz Yisrael. Some of the people are the Malbim, the Rav, the Netziva Volozhin, Rav Meir Simcha of Divinsk, who's the Meshech Chochma, or the Or Sameach. He wrote both books. And other people on that level, we're talking about some of the greatest Gedolim, and also other rabbis who, honestly, I haven't heard of. But you have to understand, these were people who were great in their time. And something that really always bothers me is this idea that, if he's not as big a rabbi as, this rabbi, so he doesn't have the right to even voice an opinion. He's not even considered in the same ballpark. First of all, there are plenty of rabbis who are in the ballpark and even greater than the rabbis on the other side. I mean, no one could come close to Rav Kook, and I always love, although of course they won't accept that, but I love this quote that I put in. I translated a book on Rav Kook's life called "An Angel Among Men," and one of my favorite quotes is something that Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, who was very close with Rav Kook, but he was known to be one of the Gedolei Yisrael in all circles. He once met Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski. Now, Rav Chaim Ozer was hands down the halachic authority in all of Europe. He was number one, no question about it. And he, Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, said to Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, "We are all Gedolim until we reach Rav Kook's doorstep," meaning we're nobody compared to Rav Kook. Okay, so first of all, there are plenty of rabbis on the level and even higher. But even if they're not, our Rebbe, Josh, our Rebbe Rav Schechter always points out, he says, you have to, once you're, what was his exact phraseology, I think he calls, when you're ra'ui lahora'ah, when you are fitting to paskin, give a decision, a halachic decision, you are allowed and even obligated to give your opinion. And you don't have to worry, oh, wait a minute, but the rabbi who said the other thing, he's greater than me. No, if you're in that category of a Gadol b'Yisrael, of a great rabbi, you are allowed to say what you feel, and your opinion counts. So you can't start telling me that, there's more big rabbis than war. Or certainly you can't say the words, all of the Gedolim were against it. That's just simply absolute lies. And as I pointed out when you were reading, he was literally repeating the sin of the spies word for word. Don't forget, the spies had very religious arguments. We're here in the desert. We're learning Torah day and night from the greatest Rebbe ever, Moshe Rabbeinu. And you want to take us into the land of Israel where that's going to stop and we're not going to be able to learn all the time. And we're going to have to work our fields. And now I
got into trouble with my wife over Shabbat when I said that Lakewood, New Jersey is the midbar of today. That's people that feel comfortable saying this is where we learn best. Why should we have to go to Israel if this is the place that we're getting our sustenance, we're getting the man, and we have the anonei kavod. We have everything we need here. Why do we need to go to Eretz Yisrael?
Right.
And that's the point they're missing. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait. So why was your wife upset?
She thought that we're not supposed to be speaking. She rightfully believes that we're not supposed to be speaking negatively about Jewish people. And she's tries to be very careful. So when I mention specific locations, she gets nervous. So
okay. So I did not say Lakewood. I did not say that. I said Jews in the diaspora are repeating the sin of the spies very clearly, and especially people like that you just quoted. I mean, he was literally bad mouthing. He was saying that. Oh, it was difficult to hear. It really hurt my ears. It's like, you're not supposed to even listen to Lashon Hara. It's a sin for the speaker and also for the listener. Like, it hurts my ears to hear it. It's very, very sad. Okay.
I always try to re-emphasize the fact that context is essential, and it's really important. And that's actually why that's why an individual rabbi has the opportunity and the option of arguing against other rabbis, because other rabbis may not know the exact context of what he is dealing with. So if he's asked a question, whether it be a specific personal question about somebody's whether a chicken is kosher or not, or whether it's a more communal question which has to do with his community. So he is the best one to be able to answer that question, because this question has come to him. He understands the context of it. And our Rebbe says many times that he doesn't like answering questions that have to do with things that are going in Eretz Yisrael, because he's in New York. So for him to answer questions here, it's a different context. So likewise, when you speak about the rabbis that lived a century ago in a totally different world, and you try to compare that, so you try to superimpose that into what we're living today, I think that is quite a jump, and it's not realistic.
Right, 100%. All right, so we're coming to the end of this segment, and we're going to be back very soon. And in the last segment, we're going to talk a little bit about the Parshat Korach, another terrible sin that the Jewish people did in the desert, causing machloket, which is really very related to what we were just talking about. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. And as promised, we're going to focus a little bit on this week's Parsha, which we always try to do, because every Parsha has something to say about Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael is one of the most central themes in the entire Torah. Yes, and I didn't make that up. I am not, a Zionist didn't make that up. It was stated by many Gedolei Israel, great rabbis. I have them all in the introduction to my book, but there's actually one, I might have said this before on the show, but, review is always a good thing. There's one which was not printed in the book, and I want to share with you. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the recognized greatest halachic authority of the Haredi world, of the ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox world. About 30 years ago, he died. So the story goes that somebody from America once came and wanted to have a meeting with him. And he sat down with him and he said, listen, I've really been studying this issue of living in Eretz Yisrael, whether it's a mitzvah in our days. And, he gave him all his different arguments. And every time he gave him an argument from some source, Rav Shlomo Zalman said something to the effect of, no, but, it doesn't matter. It's not important. And he gave him another proof, and then he said, it doesn't matter, it's not important. And after a while, the guy said, what do you mean it's not important? I'm giving you halachic proofs that there's really no mitzvah today to live in Eretz Yisrael, and you're just telling me that it's not important? And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach answered him and said, maybe technically there might not be in our generation, or at least there are opinions that in our generation there's no official Torah-based obligation to live in the land of Israel. But the land of Israel is mentioned in every single parsha in the Chumash. It's everywhere. So, don't you get that that's where God wants us to live? Whether it's officially a mitzvah or not, it makes no difference. It is clearly the desire of God. And that's really what we should be trying to do. We should be striving to do. To fulfill God's desire. Whether for whatever reason he decided not to make it a completely obligatory commandment or not. So anyway, it's in every single parsha. So how do we find it in this week's parsha? So we know the story of the machloket, the dispute that Korach started between him and Moshe and Aaron, really. And on his side, he had Datan and Aviram, these two evil people. And they said to Moshe wanted to make peace with them, and he sent the messengers, and they said, we're not going to come to you. We're not coming. I'll read it to you in English. Is it a small thing that you brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert, that you make yourself a prince over us? Furthermore, you did not bring us to a land flowing with milk and honey, nor did you give us an inheritance of fields and vineyards, like you promised, right? Will you gouge out the eyes of these men? We shall not go up. And even if you're going to gouge out our eyes, we're not coming to you. We're not going to cooperate with you. And then it says, Moshe vayichar leMoshe ma'od. I'll get back to that statement in a minute. So here we have a situation, our technician Tamar told us before, she always reads to us the different places in the world where people are listening to our show. So one of them was Egypt. There's actually someone out there in Egypt listening to our show. So for you, I want to tell you that Datan and Aviram here, what were they saying? They were in effect calling the land of Egypt, which the Jews had just recently been freed from slavery in Egypt. And they said that, it's a land, you took us away from a land flowing with milk and honey, and you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey. So this point, right, the way I say it is like this: the most insolent part of their statement is undoubtedly the words, "You have brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey." They had the audacity to call Egypt a land flowing with milk and honey when God himself used that description specifically for the Holy Land many, many times. God calls the Holy Land a land flowing with milk and honey. In fact, the first time that God appears to the greatest prophet of all time, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, he says to him, I have heard the cries of my people Israel, and I'm here to bring them out of the slavery of Egypt and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. And here you have these people, these wicked people, Datan and Aviram, calling the land of Egypt a land flowing with milk and honey. And this, according to the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, explains why Moshe got so angry. You see, before I said that this little paragraph ends with the words Vayichar leMoshe ma'od. Now, the simple meaning of the word Vayichar is get angry. But Rashi, the great commentator on the Torah, Rashi says that he became very distressed. He didn't want to say about the great Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the humblest of all men, to say that he got angry, because anger is certainly not a good trait. So therefore, he interpreted that Vayichar leMoshe ma'od means that he got very upset, not angry. But the Vilna Gaon says no. Vayichar leMoshe ma'od means exactly what it sounds like. He got angry. Why did he get angry? He was not angered by the affront to his own honor, because, as we said, he was the humblest of all people. It wasn't a personal anger. It was an anger that he could not tolerate the fact that these two wicked people referred to the land of their exile as a land flowing with milk and honey, a description that's designated only for the land of Israel. Neither could he tolerate the fact that they doubted God's promise to eventually bring the Jews into the land. And you haven't fulfilled your promise. You haven't brought us to the land of flowing in milk and honey, which you called flowing with milk and honey. So these two things made Moshe angry. Yes, there are some times where you have to get angry. You have to get angry for the sake of God, not for the sake of yourself. And that's the way the Vilna Gaon translates the word Vayichar. So I think that this is a very relevant point to our day and age, because nowadays, I don't think you'd ever hear anybody have the audacity to call America or England or Australia a land flowing with milk and honey. That far they wouldn't go, or even the chosen land. That would be, I think, a little far out there. But many of us do inadvertently say things that border, not exactly, but border on the sin of Datan and Aviram. How many times have we heard people lavishing praise on the lands of exile as if those places were God's gift to the Jewish people? How many times have we heard things like America the Beautiful, Muncie Ir HaKodesh, or what a breathtaking view about that Muncie Ir HaKodesh. So my wife is from Muncie. So one of the most upsetting things that I ever saw in Muncie. So Muncie is mostly a ultra-Orthodox community or city, I would call it. And one time there was this very, very big banner over one of the very extreme ultra-Orthodox shuls there, right? Synagogues there. Excuse me. And it said there, Sahali Varoni Yoshevet Muncie. Be joyous and sing praise, oh, those who dwell in Muncie. Now, you have to understand, that is a pasuk from, if I'm not mistaken, from Yeshayahu Hanavi, where it says, Sali Varoni Yoshevet Zion. Those who dwell in Zion be joyous. So I understand their point was that a certain great rabbi was coming to town and they wanted to show, we all should be so happy that Gadol B'Kirbech Kadosh Yisrael, right, a holy Jew, a holy rabbi is coming to visit us. That's beautiful. But the audacity to replace Zion with Muncie is so unbelievable. I cannot even understand how anybody could do such a thing. So anyway, the question is, so what's wrong with that? Like, why shouldn't you be able to praise where you're living and say it's a beautiful place? And what's wrong with that? So the answer is yes, God created everything. He created the whole world, but he created the land of Israel specifically for us. It would be like it would be like if a person's wife is away, let's say a person's wife, I don't know, she somehow got stuck somewhere, and the husband knows that she's still alive, and she's still going to return to him, but for the time being, and maybe for a long time, she's not going to be able to come back. So should he start praising other women and the beauty of other women and start going around with other women? Of course not. That would be such a terrible bigidah, such a terrible can't think of the word. It would be a terrible thing to do. So too, the land of Israel is like our wife. We should think that the betrayal. Thank you. The land of Israel is like our wife. It's like we should see the beauty. You know what? Everyone should think that their wife is the most beautiful woman in the world. Do they really honestly believe so, that there aren't other beautiful women? Of course there are other beautiful women, but you're not going to praise them. You see the inner qualities of your wife, and you understand the true beauty behind her, and therefore you consider her the most beautiful woman in the world. So too with Zion, with Eretz Yisrael, we should see Israel as the most beautiful land and the most beautiful. We should not start praising other places. We should always remember that everywhere else that we live in this world is a galut, is an exile, and only Israel is the only place where the Jewish people belong. Thank you for joining us this week, and we hope you will rejoin us next week at the same time. Thank you very much, and see you next week.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.